All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast with me, Evan McDermott. For today's show, I was joined by the one and only Leo Zagami. Leo is the author of Confessions of an Illuminati, which is actually a 12-book series, and I don't think there is a series of books or media in general that covers the Illuminati and what it is to its core more than Leo's work. Uh, for those of you not familiar with Leo, he was in the music industry. He was initiated into Freemasonry and the Illuminati and eventually chose to leave and expose the Illuminati. And he has been doing the exposing for over 20 years now. But as he mentions in the show, his connections and understanding goes much further back than that. He is one of the pioneers in terms of talking about this openly. I would say him and David Icke in particular. Some of the originals, people who have been talking about this stuff for a long time, who have a deep and rich understanding. And I hope you guys enjoy this podcast as much as I did. There's a lot to unpack, a lot to explore. And this will not be the last time that you see Leo on this show. We'll be having him back on once he releases his new book. So stay tuned. But this is a great episode for anybody interested in understanding the Illuminati, Freemasonry, and really delving into a subject that is much more complex and full of depth than I think we all give it credit for. There's much more than what it appears to be on just the surface. So get your notebooks, take some notes. There's a lot to learn in this episode. If you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you are on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You can also subscribe over on Substack as well. Appreciate everybody who tunes in, gives support, whether it's direct donations or through working with me one-on-one, whether it be through Iron and Ether fitness programs in coaching or tarot offerings as well. All my different offerings are in the episode show notes below, and I still do have my poetry books that are available, which are also in the episode show notes. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into the podcast with Leo Zagami. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. I'm excited for this episode. I am joined by the one and only Leo Zagami. Leo is the author of Confessions of an Illuminati, which is actually a 12-book series. And for anybody interested in what we talk about here today, I would highly recommend his series, as it's going to go into a lot more depth than we're capable of talking about in a little over an hour. So, Leo, I'm grateful to be connected with you, brother, and to have you here on the show. Thanks for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, it will take probably a few years.
Yeah, I was
Not
going to
enough,
say.
because it's been a labor of love that lasted a few years. So I guess that relaying it to the public. And now that I finish the 12 book series, Illuminati Confessions, I started a series of essays on specific topics which I've treated maybe superficially within the confessions as single essays. So I started, of course, as you know, with the latest one dedicated to Jeffrey Epstein, The Rise and Fall of Frankie's Monster. This summer there's going to be another new essay, which is going to also be groundbreaking. So, just keeping myself busy now that I'm based here, like we said before, starting in Southern California since 2019. And this is my new home after I had to flee Europe because of the persecution that unfortunately writing the truth and writing about these subjects brings in certain societies which are not as, let's say, tolerant as we are, at least
Right.
for the moment.
For the time being.
I mean, we have a great First Amendment and we have a great Constitution that protects us.
Right. I was gonna say, at the moment, I think we're in the right spot. Down the line, we'll see what happens.
Well, we are, I think, in the only spot worldwide where you can actually talk freely your mind. I mean, I've been all over the world, lived all over the world, and I can tell you, I'm a proud American citizen since 2024, and I can tell you that this is the only country that guarantees constitutionally this freedom for us who
Hmm.
are involved in journalism, in authoring certain books that might be deemed uncomfortable for the powers that be, and that, of course, went after me ferociously after I started publishing and having success with these books.
Right.
So here we are.
And Leo, you've been writing on this subject. It's almost interesting because if you kind of look at the timeline, I feel like these types of discussions are becoming a little bit more common. There's more people who are open to at
Yeah,
least
that
this
is
line of thinking.
that is the thing. When I started online my Illuminati Confessions before bringing them in the literary world, starting in Japan in 2009, I started 20 years ago in 2006 with my first blog, suffering the consequences that went with it because I was arrested for espionage, I was persecuted, tortured, and all kinds of things. So it wasn't an easy task. But today, everybody talks very likely about these subjects, like, okay, yes, this, that,
Hmm.
but they haven't lived them. And
Right.
that is the difference when you read my books, because I have lived them sadly on myself at times with a great sacrifice for me, for my family. As I told you just a moment ago, we had to flee at one point, even my native country of Italy, and I even had to change my citizenship. So it's really important that people realize that this testimony is heartfelt.
Hmm. Definitely. And I think anybody who's listened to you or read the books, they can feel that and, they can resonate with the authenticity within it. So, that's why I'm so excited for this show because I know what you're saying is the truth. Like I can feel it, there's something about authenticity that just kind of rings true. Um, do you, based on that timeline and, everybody is kind of a little bit more interested in, I think, subjects like the Illuminati or the New World Order. And as we kind of look at the world, it's becoming more evident like, oh, there is some hidden power structures at play here. One
Yeah, I
thing,
think that the pandemic was that moment in which really the veil was lifted, and people, even the common folk, started to realize that maybe people like me were right all along, or people like David Icke, or people like Alex Jones, and many others who have been, well, many others. We were a bunch of people that we can count maybe on one or maximum two hands 20 years ago. And so I like to give props to my colleagues who actually were there back then. While instead today, people seem to be fascinated with, I don't know, Andy Sowen, for example, who's been on the scene for just a few years and everybody, ooh, and she makes millions of views. She doesn't have she never suffered the
Mhm.
consequences of censorship in the way I suffered. I mean, I was, removed 17 channels during the pandemic, for
Oh, wow.
example, just to give you an example. And after Trump was elected, they gave me back a few, but the main channel had no subscribers anymore. All the videos were erased. And so this means really for me that we have had particularly in regards to my publications and to my testimony, a level of censorship which other researchers, of course, didn't have. Because, like I stated earlier, I mean, when you are simply I don't know, a professor, a historian, an academic, a researcher, but you have not lived certain things, the people behind the scenes, the ones that, of course, are trying to transform this world in a one world government, one world religion, everybody bow down to the AI and robotics, the future of humanity is already written and we have nothing else we can do about it. Well, those people know very well what it means to have a voice like mine repeating for 20 years. We are about to see some big changes, and those changes were not simply connected to a date like 2012. 2012 is, like I stated even back then, was a moment of maybe a starting point rather than
Mhm.
an ending point. We didn't really see the world ending that day. So the next day, everybody was like, "Ooh, yeah, great. It was all BS." And instead, 10 years later, it's not such BS. I mean, the world is literally living one of the biggest structural changes since the Industrial Revolution. This, of course, connects with the new technology, the way that information has been aggressively gathered from every single human being on earth that participated to this wild experiment called social networks. And they did it voluntarily by feeding the AI with their information.
Right.
I'm now, of course, continuing in my pursuit to warn people that we have very little time before we can maybe, before things will not be able to be even discussed any longer, and we will no longer be able to even go off the grid. So.
Right. Well, and it feels like even though more people are open to it, like I could go down the street and have a conversation with somebody random, and there's a chance they might believe in the Illuminati, right? Or they might have heard of it and they kind of have an understanding. But you've been doing this research
Or
for 20 years.
they might say the Illuminati, or they might say the Illuminati, and they might have a laugh. And everything, of course, is addressed in a way that it's always left in a limbo kind of, the popular culture, also thanks to people like Dan Brown, but later on Hollywood has popularized this subject, overly popularized it, and at the same time, of course, historians from even Masonic environments, Masonic researchers have dedicated themselves finally to the Illuminati, but in their eyes, debunking the whole thing, simply stating, "Oh, the Illuminati was an order that lasted only a few years, and then that's it." No, it's not. That's not the case. There was, of course, a formal Illuminati order, the one of Adam Weishaupt. There were many others later on, imitations, because Weishaupt himself, when he was persecuted, he simply said, "We're going to change the name. We're going to simply change the facade, not our intention to bring the world to succumb to our one world government, which is also led by the bankiers that supported Jeffrey Epstein." Jeffrey Epstein himself, is presented to the world like simply a Jewish guy from Brooklyn who had a lot of luck and ended up in great circles. No, that's not the case. Like I've proven in my book, and also you can check my articles that I regularly update at leozagami.com. The files have proven over and over that he was from an elite family that was involved in banking from the 19th century, in prominent positions in Poland, in Vienna, in Prague. They made their fortune with the textile industry. People don't know that, and that's why there is also a connection there with Les Wexner. They made their fortune, though, at the end of the 18th century, so it goes back a long time before Jeffrey Epstein was even alive. The same thing can be said also about his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, whose real name is actually Hawk, and whose father was himself a prominent exponent of the Sabbatean Frankist milieu, which traditionally dwells in espionage and other activities. So I'm continuing to address also the fact that with Donald Trump, we have obviously a disappointment. People like me thought for a moment that he might be the solution of all our problems because he was not a politician, but rather a businessman. And so, we were naive in a way, but we really wanted to believe that the guy who already has billions doesn't want to make more billions. But greed is actually a subject which I know very well, and I tell you why I know this subject very well. Greed is something that was discussed in a black and white movie of a long time ago, a movie that was made by a guy called Erich von Stroheim. It came out in 1924. People don't know this of me. I rarely talk about this. I might have actually talked about it in Volume 8 of my Confessions, which is dedicated to the entertainment world. So also touching on my experiences in the music business, or rather also in the cinema business, which was connected to my late grandmother. But the thing is that in the early 90s, in 1993 to be exact, 93, I think, yeah, 93. I was the first record producer and DJ who made music for a black and white movie from the 1920s. In this case, it was Greed, this American silent psychological drama of Erich von Stroheim. Today, we have a lot of electronic artists, even colleagues which I know very well, like Jeff Mills, who did Metropolis, and others who then have done the same thing. So, because these are black and white movies with no they didn't have, they were silent movies, so they can be, it's a little bit like a painting without really a finish, colored, or more, a painting which is left incomplete, and you can complete it in a way, as an artist. And with a group of excellent musicians at the time, we did this at the Palazzo delle Esposizioni of Rome, which is a museum. And it was then relayed here in Los Angeles soon after. So it was an event back in those days. Of course, it's long forgotten. Maybe there is some little traces of it on the internet. But my collaboration was because I believed that the subject touched in that movie, greed, is still a subject of that never gets old. Right. Apart from the fact it was also shot in a place which I've passed many times, Death Valley, which I regard as a very important location here, as you know, in Eastern California. And so the fact that people with greed lose their, it's like they go after something so much, and in the end they get sucked up by that negative side of it. So it's like, I remember when I had to make the music for it was like 2.5 hours music, and it's like a silent movie. And I was in my early 20s, so it was initially I thought, geez, man, this is so boring. But then I realized that it is important as a subject, and it's always going to be relevant. The fact that the people simply don't get that greed is not something it's not something that you can avoid if for the pure-hearted. Those are the ones who can maybe avoid the imminent problems that happen after you go after money and power so much. And I'm sure that one day, probably closer to the end of his life, Trump is probably going to realize that.
I would hope so. I'd like to think he would realize it now, but I don't think that's going to be the case. And with going back to Epstein, right? For me, when I look at that, it felt like an opportunity for the public to kind of really see beyond the veil, like you mentioned, and see what's taking place. But kind of seeing the outcome of it, it almost feels like it was a missed opportunity, because people have this idea, all right, we know Jeffrey Epstein and maybe there's a global power structure. But to me, it feels like maybe with the Illuminati and with Epstein, people just have a very surface level definition or idea on what it is. Is it that they don't see the whole web or the whole sphere of influence, or kind of understand how all of these whether different organizations or politicians or all these different fronts in the entertainment industry, do they not see how they all interconnect? Like, did we just, because I don't know if there's going to be another Epstein type of revelation that comes out that gives people really a behind the scenes look and says, "Hey, it's right in your face. People can go into the Epstein files and read all about what's taking place, and they still don't seem to see the bigger picture, at least on
Yeah, no,
paper."
the thing is that we have not even seen the entirety of the Epstein files.
Hmm.
There's
That's true.
probably a bunch of them that are still, of course, kept under closed doors. I mean, we also had the admission that Epstein himself hid in various places, his own documents, videos, and so on. We never really have the clarity that we should, because it involves such powerful people, people that are behind the political theater of Washington, the people who finance that political theater. Democracy is limited by the fact that you change every 4 years. You change, you change, you change. And so that change guarantees the elite
Hmm.
can just use them as actors in a constant movie that is fed to the masses. This is really what it's all about. So the tragedy of the ending of Jeffrey Epstein, who I believe was suicided, so was killed. Then other people, of course, say he might be living in I don't know where, and that is, of course, part of the myth, but we don't have any confirmation in one or the other direction, because simply they, of course, will never reveal if he was killed. The responsibility goes directly to the president of the United States, the DOJ of that time, who himself was involved through his father with Jeffrey Epstein. So there is all this incestuous relationship between people of power, and then you see their greed. And so in the end, they are like King Charles, who was offered the possibility to maybe see the victims, send a message of hope to these victims because of the terrible things his brother did. But that didn't happen, and probably will never happen. The excuse, of course, oh, for legal reasons, blah, blah, blah. No, there is still a form of detachment from these people, which think of themselves as superior, as untouchable, as blameless, because they are the ones who hold, together this society, and this society has to be held together with many compromises, and the common folk needs to just stay silent and not, and move further when there is this kind of episode. So yes, you're right. I don't think there will be another Jeffrey Epstein case that will unveil this kind of situation. But at the same time, we have also seen that the majority of people are now, brought into a distraction mode by the very Epstein regime, as the Iranians call it, that is causing, of course, wars, famine, and constant economic struggle for the people who wanted to live the American dream. So that is their, when you wake up in the morning, you think about paying the bills. You don't think about Jeffrey Epstein.
Hmm. Right. I was gonna say it's not the biggest priority. Is that what keeps people, would you say, complacent and
On the
distracted?
leash, on the leash, on the leash, on the
Yeah.
leash.
Yeah, I was gonna say keep them on the leash. And so with that in mind, do you think when we're looking at sort of the long-term outcome, a long-term
Mm.
goal. I mean, you hear the Agenda 2030 being thrown around, right? 2030 as a potential year. I mean, it's very much, I like the term David Icke used, the totalitarian tiptoe, where it's like you slowly but surely get people there and they don't necessarily realize they're even being led into totalitarianism because it is so slow. But do you, at least from your perspective and having been covering this for over 20 years, do you think there is a grand enough, a large enough
First of all, I want
awakening?
to correct you because I've been covering it, but I was living it much
Well, that
earlier
is
because
true.
I was initiated into the this irregular Masonic order that belonged to the Illuminati of the New World Order by Prince Aliata di Montereale in 1993. So for me, it was like an internal struggle between 2003 and 2006, which I also talk in my books, that eventually led me to disclose what I knew because I wanted to survive before they eventually got me out, maybe whacked me in some way or whatever. So that for me it's been a lifetime since I
Mm,
was brought up by my grandfather who was a politician, my father who was a psychiatrist who was experimenting in the paranormal and worked with MK Ultra. These things are very relevant to understand what brought me to eventually start this quest for unfolding all the truth I knew in 2006. So that is the start of something, yes, but it's not the start of my experience, which really started probably from the moment I was born and everything I saw in a very privileged environment because of the fact I was related even with the British royal family, or I came from a Sicilian aristocratic background together combined, you know. So this is something I, of course, I wanted to point out.
yeah, for sure. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because based on your like background living it, you chose to speak out and you chose to
Yeah, I could
expose
have
it.
chose 20 years ago to simply not speak out, take the money, and
Hmm.
shut up, and
Right.
live my life in compromise with nice, villas and nice everything, and never have to worry one day about, selling a book, which is like people say, oh, well, the guy is trying to make money selling books. Well, maybe you should really consider why I'm brought to have to survive through books now because I have renounced to so much. I mean, even when I left Italy, I had a big villa. I go there, with the car, I push the button, the gates open, and and all that. So now I live in a small apartment, one bedroom apartment, a condo, and of course, it's a different kind of situation. But me and my wife love it anyway because we love freedom mostly.
Hmm.
It's like it's great to have all the villas you want and everything, but then you have to also compromise, or you have to. And once you step slightly out of line, you find the police at your door, like it happened to me many times when I was in Europe.
Right. Well, would you say that the majority of the people involved, like let's say in Freemasonry, at what level do they
Now,
have?
Freemasonry, I mean, it's today relevant up to a certain extent because we are no longer in the golden age of fraternities. And so we are no longer in the golden age of those esoteric fraternities. In fact, like I explained here, B'nai B'rith, for example, which was born out of the will of the Ashkenazi Jews who arrived here to be integrated, and then they did integrate. But initially, they were offered actually before opening their first lodge of the B'nai B'rith to actually open another lodge of the Odd Fellows because it was the golden age of fraternities. Freemasonry and all that stays to this day esoteric. B'nai B'rith instead in 1920s, like I explain in my book, abandoned that esoteric facade. So today, actually, you have think tanks, you have Davos, you have Bilderberg, you have all these which are stripped of that esoteric element, which for a period of time, like I explained, especially in volume 8 of my Confessions, it's like stripping that esoteric element was also part of what the Illuminati wanted to do because the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt were actually using and abusing Freemasonry and the esoteric world to then push their political and geopolitical goals. Freemasonry today has maybe some lodges of relevance, of importance that are at times involved even in illegal activities. Recently, we had something happening in France that arrived on the news regarding a lodge that was highly irregular in the way they actually belong, even if they were part of an obedience which originally was rather a regular institution, but then they became a lodge that wanted to, I don't know, have contract killers and all kinds of things, and of course connections with the intelligence services and all that. It's a little bit like the P2 Lodge or the kind of Freemasonry which in turn I was myself involved in. Now, there is still going to always be those forms of Freemasonry, but I want to stress it's a minority. The majority of Freemasonry, it's made out of people who want to socialize, who want to maybe learn something about this or this other esoteric subject. Though, I mean, the esoteric element, it's present. It's not overly present, especially within so-called regular Freemasons. So
I gotcha.
we are witnessing today a decline in numbers because the young guy who wants to join the lodge says, why should I join these people? Why should I go and waste so many days a month to learn what and to do what when I can actually go on my computer and learn those things probably? Yes. Of course, there is the direct experience, there is everything that is done within the lodge. If it's done in a current way, in line with the ancient mystery schools that wanted to perfectionate mankind, know thyself as, but like I said today, there is also a lot of misconceptions about Freemasonry. Because it's also been incapable of having publicly a debate when there were such problems within it. Their nature, the secretive nature. In volume 7 of my Confessions, I dedicated 3 books, volume 6.66, volume 7, volume 6.66, and volume 9, to the concept of cyber Satan. And in volume 7 in particular, I debate and I discuss and I show with evidence how Freemasonry and the Vatican are working actively together to put together one world religion. Having said that, it's still a minority of elite Freemasons involved in this kind of things.
Right. And
You're
it's
not, you're not gonna find the sheriff of a town of in South Dakota that is a Freemason and maybe has even gone through certain degrees, but
right.
he doesn't have any connections necessarily, but maybe his grandmaster. So it's then left to a minority of elite members at times to do certain choices. However, I find myself here in California, and initially I went to the local lodges to see how things were. Of course, due to the nature of my work and everything, immediately I was contacted and they said, oh, connect with this guy from the military intelligence in Los Angeles because you can't simply, with your kind of experience and everything, go into any lodge. We want you to knock to a specific lodge, do it. Actually, they even gave me a secret password. But at the end, I was like, I just, I wanted to simply actually go to a lodge because here I was new, I didn't know people. I thought maybe it would be a social thing. But of course, due to the nature of what I've been doing for many years, for them, I was immediately, voted out of certain lodges locally, even without my knowledge.
Oh, wow.
Usually you have to, knock on the door of the lodge, and then they vote internally if accepting you or not. they, as soon as they knew I was in the area, the local lodges, they were simply saying, "Oh, no, 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 we don't want this guy. Vote him out, vote him out, vote him out. Don't have him." And it's sad, but I mean, it's sad because people like me who are free-minded, who have knowledge, I for many years I was a member of, now it doesn't exist any longer, but it was a very important research group, the Canterbury Masonic Research Center in London, under the Marquis of Northampton. And I had a lot of, as an historian of Freemasonry, a lot of experience, which still, in fact, is recognized by some Masonic historians, even here in the United States, who are in contact with me. But, it's of course, maybe too much for these people to have, in a simple, regular lodge, a guy like me. They would be like, what is Zagami doing here? What do you,
Right.
you know?
Right. It's almost like there's a social consequence to doing the work that you're doing. And what's interesting is when you just look at the Illuminati in general, I think a lot of people do associate the esoteric element like you're talking about, but it's almost like, at least when we're looking at the grand scheme and moving into a new world
Okay, so
order.
there's two kinds of Illuminati. Even back then, when Adam Bishop created his order, there were the Illuminati of Avignon, who had a profound esoteric mystery school element and very
Right.
much. And then there was instead the Illuminati of Bavaria, which, if you go and study, it was simply, they were using the esoteric aspect to cover their political and manipulatory ways. So it was two kinds of. There is then there was at one point from there has been a war of two factions that were, like at one point the Illuminati wanted to be perceived as Christian. Which I mean is quite laughable, but their concept of Christianity was Gnostic. So that happened in Bishop's Illuminati, but also happened with the establishment of Martinism, of Claude de Saint Martin, or earlier Martinezism, which had this Christian elements, esoteric. And then, of course, with the Theosophical Society was established in 1875. Things changed because then there was this Oriental element that was kind of coming in, which took 1 century to fully manifest. And then, of course, in the 1960s, everybody had a guru and everybody was dancing around naked and everybody was saying a Shanti there and here, Om, this and that. And everybody seemed to have been activated by a century of Theosophical Society, which also had a very heavy influence on modern Satanism, as I explain in my books. Because people like Anton LaVey, of course, were inspired by Aleister Crowley, but Aleister Crowley himself was within a Theosophical Society milieu, operating with a network of theosophists that, of course, then led him to the Ordo Templi Orientis, which claimed to be some kind of Academia Masonica, but was actually born out of the experience the Illuminati had with the Eastern mystery schools, the practices of Tantra, of sexual magic that were kind of prohibited in the Victorian area, but in the Victorian area they were prohibited in Great Britain, while instead maybe in Austria or Germany, where there was a heavy Sabbatean Frankist presence, things were different. Because let's not forget that we cited Jeffrey Epstein, but we didn't cite his connection with the Sabbatean Frankist cult, which is an heretical movement within Judaism, which had a tremendous influence within Judaism.
Right. Could you dive a little deeper for that for listeners who maybe, because that's another subject that I think a lot of people have heard of, the Sabbatean Frankinism cult, but
well,
they don't
course,
fully understand it. It gets swept under the rug, or it's not fully
well, I
articulated.
mean, we even had, people like Andy Sowen citing Jacob Frank, Shabbatai Zevi, or Moses Dobruska, who was a cousin to Jacob Frank, and who ended up being a participant of this group known as the Asiatic Brethren, which became themselves a way within the Illuminati Masonic network to let in these heresies of the Sabbatean Frankists. Sabbatean Frankists are two different things, though, and then get unified later. Let me explain the way. They get unified from the beginning because Frankism is born out of Sabbateanism. The Sabbatean movement is born out of Shabbatai Zevi. Within the 17th century Judaism, there was an influence to arrive to some kind of messianic realization. And like I explained in my latest book, it was actually paradoxically the Christian Puritans who were pushing for it more than the Jews. Because they said, without these Jews going back to Israel, we can't have the fulfillment of our, of our end time scenario, and then we can't have Jesus coming back. And so we need to get them back. So the father of Shabbatai Zevi, who was a merchant working with the Puritans in England, was extremely influential for his son, who then came out and declared himself the Messiah, and who had then a guy who was also very influential as a thinker within the Jewish world at the time, called Nathan of Gaza, based in Gaza, who became almost his John the Baptist, and at that point convinced him that he had to announce himself as the Messiah. At that point, more than half of the Jews worldwide accepted him. So everything could have ended up really with, a full-on acceptance if it wasn't that God, in a way, intervened. And the Sultan, the head of the Ottoman Empire, which of course controlled the whole of the Middle East back then, said, Shabbatai, if you don't convert to Islam, I'm going to chop your head, basically. So he said, okay, no problem, I'm going to convert. Who cares? Because this guy was such, a manipulative figure. He said, okay, I'm going to make the show, I'm going to convert. 1666 was the year he converted. That was also indicative because the Antichrist, 666, so this is a number that has always, it's a number that has always interested everybody. And so he converts. At that point, of course, most of Judaism abandons him, but not all of them. And those who decide to simply convert to Islam and continue in secret, becoming crypto Jews. A little bit like earlier on, in the Hispanic Iberic Peninsula, you had the conversos or the marranos, which were converts that were pushed to convert to the Jewish converts, which were pushed to convert to the Jewish faith. Some did it in genuine way, conversos, some did it in a manipulative way, just like Shabbatai Zevi, they were the marranos. And there is also a connection there with between the Marranos and the Conversos and the very early puritanical ideas that will trigger the establishment of Sabbateanism. And then a century after the birth of Shabbatai Zevi, there had been already a guy called Baruch Russo claimed to be reincarnation. They believe in reincarnations in Orthodox Judaism. They still believe in reincarnation. Not all, but most. And then you had Jacob Frank, who was born in modern-day Ukraine, who then went to Thessaloniki, which is Thessaloniki today, was part of the Ottoman Empire, had the biggest Sabbatean community, and then he get recognized as a reincarnation of Shabbatai Zevi. That is where Frankism is born. He goes back into the Catholic fold rather than stay in the Islamic Ottoman Empire, and then it starts the infiltration of the Catholic and then the Christian world at large, infiltrating also the Anglican Church and all that. And so then you had also the establishment of the banking system in Frankfurt, because Jacob Frank established his court in Offenbach, and you have the Rothschilds, the Schiffs, all the future banking cartel was established thanks to this heretical belief that encouraged, in a way, the Ashkenazi bankers. Now, there was also a Sephardic element to the Sabbateans at the start, because, of course, most of the Sabbatean converts in the Ottoman Empire were Sephardic. But then after, when it became with Jacob Frank, it kind of became an Ashkenazi thing,
Okay.
an
Yep.
Ashkenazi thing. So this is just to describe this phenomenon, which has then influenced the secret society world, because from Eliphas Levi, who is considered the inventor of the word occultism, he was actually, nobody knows, but I have brought plenty of hard evidence of his mentorship by the Sabbatean Frankists, by a specific Polish Sabbatean Frankists, because Poland became the epicenter, and then Vienna and Austria became also the epicenter. Okay. That's why the Illuminati, when they were closed down officially, attempted to reopen through a guy who was connected with the Sabbatean Frankists, who was Theodor Royce, who eventually then will charter Aleister Crowley. I mean, it's all interconnected, very complex, a bunch of names, 12 volumes of my confessions, because it's like an encyclopedia going through, centuries of knowledge and of manipulation of religious knowledge.
Right.
Well, aside from political, the political is like the puppets, It's like, the puppets that comes out and says, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. But it's a puppet, Then after 10 years, the guy is retired. He's given maybe a lot of money to retire, or he, of course, takes a great position as a CEO of this or this other company as a reward by the swamp that seems to be simply there, and there is no way of draining the swamp. Right. We were, like I said earlier, eluding ourselves, but it's not going to happen again. We're not going to have another Trump that's going to tell we got to do that, because it's not going to be credible anymore. Right. Anybody that comes out today with the same narrative that made Trump who is Trump today, it's not believable. Because Trump is not believable, and neither anybody that will do the same thing in the future. However, Trump is also consolidating himself as a sort of messianic figure, because he is backed by the Chabad-Lubavitch movement, which is part of the Sabbatean Frankist infiltration. And so, and at the same time, he's redirecting Christianity and Christian evangelics to follow him like a sort of messianic figure, which is really the work of the Antichrist.
Right. I was about to ask, does that give him the definition of an Antichrist?
Well, he might not be the ultimate because he's too old, but he's definitely aiding the next and ultimate Antichrist, because once the technology, which he himself, like Palantir and all his allies in Silicon Valley are putting together for us, this dystopic scenario, then that is the scenario which inevitably will see the rise of the Antichrist.
Right. And at this point, like, what role so if Trump is aiding into that, what role would an Antichrist figure deliver to humanity at
right? I mean, we have now a Antichrist in the White House, but he's not the ultimate Antichrist. So everything you see from Trump, but of course, with the Antichrist, you will see, maybe, Trump wants to be the ultimate Antichrist, but it's a question. It's a question that is due to his, to his being old, that doesn't permit him to, we have Jared Kushner, of course, within his fold, which is definitely a candidate, and who definitely goes around the world doing things that he doesn't have any, security clearance to do what he does. He doesn't have any official position to do what he does. He's emerging as though always in the most critical setups and that is really very Antichrist. But
Hmm.
we then have also Prince William, because Prince William, it's also a possible candidate in the age of AI and robotics.
Right. And with the rising technology, do you feel the New World Order is going to be implemented through the technology? Like, is it a almost like a type of slavery
Well,
or
the new order
servitude?
the new order already is implemented.
Well, true.
I mean, it's been implemented after the Second World War. Then, of course, the new world order that we are going to see now might not see the United States as the leading country simply because China is, of course, the one that spoiled of every ethical and moral restraints, is unfolding probably the most powerful robotic and AI setup for 2030, which
Right.
is scary and also makes us realize that there is really no compromise with China, because China is not a nation of people with a soul. They are
Mhm.
soulless people. They might be good people, personally. I know a lot of good Chinese people.
Yep.
The problem is that as a nation, it's a soulless nation. The communism has destroyed the fact that any kind of religion needs to be controlled by the state. Even the Catholic faith has made a deal with them. And in the fall of 2018. I talk about it in my last installment of my Confessions. There is a whole chapter about, how McCarrick also was involved, Nancy Pelosi, all these people involved with China, and what happened in the fall of 2018 revolutionized forever the Catholic faith in that country, because they had an underground form of Catholicism which was still genuine, and then there was this state built Catholicism since the 1950s. And in the end, the Vatican goes and recognizes not the underground one like the past popes did, but rather the state built bishops, which were, I don't know, I mean, their lineage has never been challenged. But if you are a theologian, it's very simple. To be a bishop, you need to have a line, episcopal line that comes from St. Peter. They
Hmm.
have it from what? Mao Zedong, Karl Marx. It's just heresy at the worst level. But that is really what is happening here, because people forget, but the Jesuits have been in China for almost 500 years, and they have been hand in hand with the Chinese, working even in establishing places like Shanghai as a global ports of relevance.
Hmm. Right. And with that in mind, to me, when you look at the bigger picture, it doesn't feel like there's a political solution to the actual issue of this type of takeover. Because you're right. I've always said that we already have a one world government. It just operates behind the scenes, right? I mean, that's kind of, you have nations like the US and China. And, when you look at the back door, through the back door, they're all kind of working together towards a similar goal. There is much more of a unified front than I think people realize. It's kind of an illusion that we do have these nation states in place. Obviously, you and I have more freedom to speak our mind here in the United States versus somewhere like China. So there are levels of individual differences within each
There
country.
are still levels because we still retain a sovereignty, but of course, in a one world government scenario, that sovereignty is non existent. Now, we saw for a brief time during the pandemic when they tried, of course, to eliminate that sovereignty. And, at that point, you will see how the United Nations and, of course, the World Health Organizations acted in a completely criminal way, in defiance of every local law, and
Hmm.
they will intervene. And unfortunately, the heads of states of most states in the world gave them that power,
Right.
and it ruined the economy of entire countries.
Right.
Uh, you have the rare cases whereby you have maybe Sweden that instead saw the whole thing as an exaggeration and left their citizens to freely move and behave normally, which was like, an oasis in Europe, because the rest of Europe was like in Italy, you have to write where you were going. When I heard about that, I was so happy to not no longer be in Europe or in Italy, because I would have been probably eliminated very soon. I actually still have ongoing court cases because during the pandemic they tried even to get through Interpol America to to intervene against me. But of course, in Washington they told them here, we protect the privacy of our citizens. And of course, we protect the freedom of speech. So the guy is a journalist. He's not, he's not somebody who has murdered anybody. So you will not be able to do what you want against him. But they tried in every way possible to silence me, especially because I do a podcast also in Italian, which is very full still. And especially during the pandemic, I was the only one who was saying certain things because the police couldn't break through my door like they did when I was living in Italy. They couldn't, come there and threaten me. So it made it really for them very difficult.
Right.
I was occasionally interviewed on the national radio there, but then when they realized that I was like, a free mind that was not obeying with their senseless laws, then they never really had the courage to even have me on again.
Right. Right. Do you feel that with the direction we're moving, there is a way within the United States, for example, to still preserve like the Constitution and the freedom of speech? Or do you think
I definitely think that we have the First and the Second Amendment, and these two amendments are completely interconnected. We know that the second is about protecting from eventual tyrants, ourselves, and that's why we need to have weapons. That is something that no other nation has in the Western world, and that's why they are succumbing to tyrants. The first thing that Mao Zedong did when he arrived to power in China was to take away all the weapons. So that's it. Australia in the 90s offered money for weapons, gathered them all together, took them from the people, and now the Australians during the pandemic, they were treated like, they were enslaved with the worst because they didn't have weapons to defend themselves. It's not like, when the police shows at your door, if you have weapons, it's one thing. If you don't have weapons, it's another thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I was going to say in South Dakota, we just assume everybody is carrying underneath, because it's constitutional carry. You don't have to reveal it. You can open carry. So, and if anything, it prevents a lot of trouble that you see in certain environments, like in the cities or like in, where you have gang violence.
Yeah, these cities, because they are traditionally in the hands of the left and with these very draconian laws on guns, they reflect a little bit what goes on in Europe, where in the end, the people who have, for example, in Italy, the only ones with weapons are either the mafiosi or either the police forces. Yeah. And the normal citizen doesn't have anything. So then, the police, if they know that you are a mafiosi, will not dare to even knock at your door without, of course, they will break in if they are arresting you, but they will come in with, I don't know, special forces and stuff. Instead, when the ordinary policeman, which regularly harasses people in Italy, it's not like here. You get stopped in the street by the police without no reason, simply for a check. You get stopped with your car simply for a check. Right. And you have to obey them, otherwise, you get arrested. It's insane, without any reasons. Here, there must be a reason. I might go at 30 miles an hour rather than 25. Okay, they stop you. Sir, and there is a reason. But in Italy, they don't have a reason. Since the 1970s, their strategy of tension has created this architecture of control, whereby you are controlled more and more and more. And it, instead of decreasing, it has been increasing also after 9/11.
Mm.
And, I mean, just remember what happened after 9/11. I remember it very well. I mean, I was living between Italy, Norway, England because of my work, and suddenly I had a lot of mobile phone numbers because, of course, I might use the English one when I'm in England, the Norwegian one, but suddenly, starting from Italy, because, oh, there was a terrorist who apparently used this thing, and suddenly you had to register your mobile phone numbers. You had to say that you were the owner and prove you were the owner. And so control arrived aggressively. No burner phones allowed in Europe.
Mm. Oh, wow. I was gonna say it's a I was just talking about earlier today going back to a flip phone, getting a burner phone, so I'm not in the smartphone technological grid
Absolutely.
anymore because
Absolutely. I use the apps and everything only when I'm on the computer. I don't have that scroll fixation or
yep.
anything. A phone for me is a phone. I use it to answer a call. That's about it.
Right. Well, and it feels like those are the types of steps people need to actually be willing to take in order to prevent, because, everybody has a cell phone that's a smartphone. It's a digital tracker, realistically, at the end of the day. They're already creating a digital smart grid. They're already they're actively choosing to participate in almost like what's a digital enslavement. And I think people's perception in their mind that's being infringed upon, and they don't necessarily even realize it because it is in the mind, and they don't recognize maybe a lot of their thoughts, their beliefs, their ideas, they were given to them and, beaten down beaten into their head more so than actually having free thinking, original thinking. And to me, that's kind of where it feels like the
But
most.
that's what we're going to see, gradual enslavement until 2030, and then we're definitely going to see something different happening after, though, because at that point, I think that a minority will challenge all this,
Mhm.
and they will build something external to this grid. They will realize now, now they are still into the fake belief that they can maybe do something to bypass the system if they simply do this or that. But I think after 2030, then we will have some gradual changes. However, that would manifest something different, maybe, an off-the-grid society of some kind. Maybe there will be some inner fights within our own American society, which is unfortunate, but that's probably where, we are always talking about the possibility of a civil war unfolding, but where is it going to unfold? It's definitely not going to unfold in the cities where
Mhm.
everybody is obedient and is going to be restrained through the birth of the smart cities. And so every single, move you make in a city already is monitored by face recognition cameras. So the city is not the place where you want freedom. The city is a place of compromise. You go inside the city because you have to, not
Mhm.
because you want to live there anymore.
Right. Exactly. Well, and that's a good point you make because a lot of times when people bring up civil war, immediately people think of cities and they think of the chaos because of the large population. And you're right, because freedom lives. I live in a town. Yeah.
Cities will become increasingly in this techno-feudalism that we are, like I explained in volume 9, in volume 6.66, in volume 7. I focus very much on the rise of the techno-feudalism. And if you think about it, the cities will be these fortresses of digital power where you will have, drones flying everywhere, robots moving everything is going to be like simply you go into a city, you're like, okay, wow,
Hmm.
that's it. I'm not going to have the capacity of rebelling. Well, you're going to rebel. You're going to fight with a robot. It's going to kick your ass. So, I mean, it's not going to happen. The cities are going to become the fortresses of this establishment.
Right, exactly. And I live in a town of 2,000 people, right? So it's much more likely that the type of rebellion that you're speaking of, I mean, this is a place that values freedom and
Yes,
sovereignty, and
yes,
people want to be left alone. Like
yes.
that's why they're here, you know? So a place like here is going to be much more likely put up a fight and have tension with certain digital, I would say.
The thing is this. The establishment, the elite, which I've been denouncing for 20 years now, after coming out of, after I was working for them, I came out of it and I started to denounce them. And for 20 years, I've been saying these things. But of course, I also understand that the modern updates to technology that we couldn't even imagine 20 years ago, it's unfolding this whole thing in an even more, I mean, even George Orwell would have been like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's not what I figured that might happen because it's just beyond, anything that could be comprehended at the time of George Orwell. But when I started 20 years ago, we knew that transhumanism was something that, could manifest. We knew that people will be microchipped in one way or another. Nowadays they say, "Oh, but we haven't been microchipped." Yeah, but you carry on your smartphone wherever you go, idiot. So
Yeah.
it doesn't make a difference,
Yeah.
I mean, in 10 years from now, though, maximum 15, nobody will have a smartphone anymore because you're gonna be simply dealing with the AI, and probably a lot of people will at that point have that element inserted in the body, and that's it. We're going to have two types of human beings. The type of human being that is there scrolling while he does this, and saying, wow, I have all the knowledge of the world at my disposal. I can go in all the databases. You can't win me. I'm this. But in
Mm-hmm.
reality, they are like puppets, and they are puppets of the Antichrist, of Satan, of the fallen angels, of something evil that is definitely manifesting like never before, and
Right.
that is more scary than ever.
Right. Well, and I feel like at that point you lose the true element of what it means to be a human being. Like you lose it's really a capturing of the soul. And I spoke with a gentleman named James Tunney. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he's written countless books on the transhumanism movement. And him and I have had probably about 24 hours of podcast time just because we chat for 3 or 4 hours about the transhuman element. And it really does seem like an inevitability that there will be that man and machine merger. And whether it ends up being you have parallel societies where you have people who are oriented
I
towards
hope
freedom and
that we will have we will be given the independence,
yeah,
and we will not be forced into compliance even when we are, like you said, in a 2,000 people kind of town. Because the problem is going to be also resources. Water is one of the most important resources of the future.
hmm
And that is something that they are trying already to, you know, take for themselves, and they want control over it. However, there is country where this water is plentiful, and it's Russia, for example, and they don't want to comply with giving necessarily their water resources to this or this other private company. So there is, of course, the differences, but the water problem is just as bad as the fossil fuels problem, and
hmm
it's going to become also very relevant in how, because they might say, okay, 2,000 people want to rebel to us, we cut you water and gas and also, what are you going to do now?
right.
So that is the 2,000 people that live making an example here,
hmm
in your town should from now say, we don't give out our rivers, our springs, our things to any private company, and we are going to retain control over them for our 2,000 people. That is very important,
hmm
because otherwise they will say, and then when it comes down to fossil fuels or anything that we need that they might give electricity, that dependence needs to be readdressed. And so at one point, you say, okay, maybe we should renounce to, having that big truck, that big pickup truck, that big thing, because today people know that diesel is skyrocketing and it's, and so it makes sense that you don't use it anymore.
Hmm.
Ah, no, but there is the electric vehicles. Oh, wow. And that is a different thing because the electric vehicles, are also part of the grid because they are most of the cars that are electric have so many components to do with AI and robotics, which have then immediate control over you.
Right.
So yes, it's true. We could recharge our car with simply the power of the sun, but then could we drive that car without somebody bypassing us and stopping us while we drive? And so then we will have to maybe be a little bit smart, find a way to bypass that form of control. So,
Hmm.
I mean, there is going to be a lot of things that need to be addressed in practical terms.
Right, exactly. And it feels like if we're not having the discussions now and coming up with these solutions now,
Yeah.
by the time it's implemented, which is soon, it's going to be like, oh, why weren't we
Yeah,
discussing this 10 years
because
ago?
you could say, okay, I'm going to have an electric car and I'm going to ignore any problem. Yes, but the moment in which the software update doesn't come or they deliberately eliminate that software from your car, that car is worth nothing.
Right, exactly. And you lose your freedom of transportation, freedom of travel. Right,
Yes.
exactly.
So, or the oil, okay, we need refineries. Those refineries are very important. The control over those refineries are very important. Here in California, because of political decisions, they have closed so many refineries, and now they find themselves in really a disaster
Hmm.
that can only get worse.
Right, exactly. And it's only, like you said, it's only going to get worse. So you look at the California the last 10 years, the track they've been going on, people can expect the kind of the same trajectory. Um, and Leo, I know we're kind of coming up on time here. Just as like kind of a wrap up question and what we're talking
Yes.
about, what do you, when people are looking, because we're offering practical solutions and ideas and ways to kind of move forward, what can people do, in your opinion? I know it's difficult to predict the future per se, but as this year unfolds, what are things people should be mindful of to recognizing, hey, this is part of the larger agenda? Like, how do people actually go and kind of push back and reclaim their sovereignty and preserve their own freedom on an individual level, but how do you make a
Okay,
difference on a collective level if
sure.
it's possible?
First of all, sovereignty at an individual level means I'm sovereign by purchasing books which are not in digital format and I can keep in a library, purchasing records or CDs that I can keep and I can, because that is my CD, that is my record, that is my book. That is very important. It might simply, but these are things that are made for recreational purpose. No, this is the culture that we need to preserve. And that culture cannot simply be filtered by streaming services that can decide one day to switch off the services because you can. So that is a very important element for the educational purposes of future generations and whatnot. And then at the same time, we say, like we just said, that we have to devise ways of being independent with the supplies of water,
Hmm.
use fossil fuels if possible. We can use them if we have a refinery. But if we don't have a refinery, how are we gonna, you know,
Hmm.
simply be independent with that kind of, dependency, which is obvious, because today we see the whole world is struggling simply because they say the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And that becomes another excuse for the Great Reset unfolding even further.
Hmm.
Because then, thanks to this, rise in price and things, they are simply resetting, you know, resetting. And then the wars, the 2026, this is the year where we are seeing really an escalation that goes even further than what we have already seen since 2022 with Ukraine. So wars, the possibility maybe that in the future we're not going to have this great mobility, because if there is no fuel for the airplanes now, Europe, for example, this summer might have half of the flights.
Wow.
But we need to get used to that. We need to go back to the mind of a great grandfather who were not there thinking, oh, tomorrow morning I want to go and have, I want to go there in Taiwan. I want to go on the beach in Thailand, or I want to go in India. No, you're going to have to understand that moving like we were used in the last few decades is not going to be so realistic anymore.
Right.
And so, that construction around you of a microcosm of certainties is much more important and relevant than the macrocosm of uncertainties. Oh, well, I've connected with this guy over there, with this other guy over there, and we have friends all over the world. I want to see them. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to sell my product to this or this other country. I think you should address more the microcosm of your community rather than thinking more about globalization, which inevitably is connected to the unfolding of more and more control.
Right. Definitely. Yeah.
And the greed of those people like that are behind the scenes, like Elon Musk or the Jeff Bezos or the others that are simply becoming richer and richer and richer, or the ones that like Trump are using politics to make themselves rich rather than making America great again. America is being unfortunately robbed of their future and of their American dream. And that is sad, but we have to realize that's the new norm. And once you have removed maybe this president and you have another president or another political party in power, things are not going to change, because the technology that is in place today simply it's driving a change that is bigger than any political decision or choice. And it's facilitating that escalation, that rise of the Antichrist that eventually will dominate. Of course, religiously speaking, these are great times, because behind all these uncertainties and behind all these turmoils, these wars and rumors of wars, we have the promise of something better that might manifest. And so we also have that element of hope that we should always keep in mind in these times of great challenge. So thank you so much for having me today and for this great chat. I will, of course, send you probably in a month or so just the topics of my new book, which is very relevant, completely different topic from what we have discussed today, but still very relevant. And then, we might unfold it once again for your audience. And thank you so much for having me on.
I'd love to, Leo. I look forward to that chat. And like I said, I'll have this out. I'm quick with the turnaround, so this will be out in a few days. And Leo, what just for any of the listeners, where can they find your work, or where can they find your books if they listen?
LeoZagami.com, www.leozagami.com. LeoZagami.com is the website which I update regularly with my latest articles, which are usually based on my various books. You can find also the links to my latest books at leozagami.com. So just go on leozagami.com. You will also find the link to my podcast, which I conduct regularly every week. Even if the censorship and the shadow ban goes on, I try.
Yep.
I know that for somebody who has been in this game for a long time, I should have millions of subscribers, millions of viewers. But remember that that is not possible when you are really challenging the system. 10 years
Yep.
ago, they started to eliminate my videos, and just like they did with Alex Jones, they removed a bunch of stuff from from the internet that probably is lost forever. But at the same time, now I'm still present, and hopefully I will be still doing my books, which, like the Latins used to say, scripta manent, verba volant, which means the writing stays. The words
Mm.
might,
I was gonna
might
say.
just simply, but the words that you write stay, and that writing for me is relevant, and it's the best way of also digging deeper in the subjects we have discussed today. Because, like we said before, it will take probably so long to simply dig on one in this book and go into the detail of them.
Hmm.
But people, should take their time out of the day to read and study.
Yes.
All
I,
books are good because books gives us the possibility of developing then our own choices, whatever they
absolutely.
might be. I hope they're good.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And I'll have your website linked in the episode show notes below so everybody listening can just scroll on down, click it, and I would highly encourage get the books because the words are forever, like you were saying, and I very much resonate
Yeah,
with that
the,
concept.
the writings are there to stay, and it's a testimony of the times we are living, as much as all these hidden elements that, generally speaking, the academic world has been ignoring. Because, of course, when you are a university and you finance by this or this other guy or this or this other institution, either religious or non religious, you have always a commitment to the people who permit you to be there.
Right.
And so that's why the academic world has ignored a lot of the elements of great interest, which I outline in my books. But in my books, you're not going to simply find speculation or, theories or hypotheses. You're going to find names, you're going to find the dates, you're going to find ways of also furthering your own studies, because I always include, with all these citations, a way for you to commit to your own further studies, which is
Right.
also very relevant and important. So you then can decide and make your mind up on these subjects.
Right. Which is what's most important, I think, for all of the listeners, for all of us. So,
Yeah,
Leo, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on the show, and I look forward to getting to chat in the very near future and for your next book to come on out. So,
take
thank you for
care.
coming
All the
on, my
best.
friend.
God
I,
bless America and the rest of the world.
absolutely. Special thank you to Leo for coming on the fifth dimension. Hope you guys enjoyed this one as much as I did. And look at it, it's a lot to unpack. You might need to go back and listen a second time. I've done that just to soak it all in. There's a lot to tune into and a lot to uncover. And I would encourage you guys to read his series and take your knowledge on these subjects even deeper, because it is important that we understand what is taking place at the global level. And having an understanding of that allows us to see the direction that we are moving in. So if you're a fan of the show, subscribe whatever platform you are on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You can also subscribe over on Substack as well. If you want to work with me one-on-one, I offer fitness coaching and programs that are available. You can just buy a pre-made program or you can get a custom one built. We're going to be having long-term coaching options in the near future. Goal of Iron and Ether, integrating fitness and spirituality. A lot of times they get disconnected. Can't have that. Can't have that. They're really one in one. So that is in the episode show notes below, as well as you can book a one-on-one tarot reading with me as well. That's going to wrap up this episode. Stay tuned because we have more great interviews, podcasts that'll be released in the very near future. And I'll see you all next time.